If you're like me, you've probably come across Trickywagons studio vlogs on YouTube, found their art, and thought, wow, that is some really nice anatomy. So of course, you'd want to study from their art. Unlike the other two artists I've done in this series, Trickywagons doesn't have as many fully finished art pieces online for us to reference, but I did grab a few, and thankfully with the help of her art books, I have been able to break down the most important parts of her style. So in this video, I'll break down what I've learned about their art style, and show you how I've taken what I liked about their art style and implemented it into mine. I'll study from these drawings I found online, but I also reference her art books that I've bought over the years. While you can't buy most of these art books anymore, you can still buy them digitally on their art shop. Before you start any study, it's important to hone in on what you want to focus on. You probably have a specific part of the artist style that you really like and would like to replicate. So in my case, this would be the way they do their anatomy, especially their hands and chibis. So in my study, I'll primarily focus on these aspects on top of the art style as a whole. Alright, first, proportions. Unlike the typical anime proportions I'm used to, Trickywagons actually follows much more realistic proportions. The eyes aren't that large and are generally one eye apart. They also leave more room between the edges of the face, unlike the anime style, which oftentimes doesn't have that much space. If we combine the eyes and the eyebrows, then we can divide the face up into about 5 sections. Normally, I don't talk too much about hair, but in this case, I did notice that the hair is also quite geometric. This actually applies to a lot of their style overall, but in her style, I feel like the hair is broken into shapes more obviously than what we would normally see. They definitely go for more of the overall shape rather than including a lot of small details. The nose is also pretty standard, using lines to define the nose from different angles, except the front-facing angle, which only includes the nostrils and then is rendered to get the rest of the shape. The width of the shoulders are about 1 head each, and the characters are often quite tall at around 8 heads tall, although I'm sure this does also vary a bit just based on the character's height in general, but she seems to have a personal preference for drawing more tall characters. When it comes to her anatomy, it's stylized yet leans more on the realistic end, with carefully placed lines to block out the overall shape. Not to mention, she as a whole seems to use more geometric shapes rather than smooth lines, which I think is one of the main reasons her anatomy looks so pleasing, besides the fact that she's also very clearly a master of anatomy. This is a bit hard to replicate since, unlike other parts of a style, replicating this anatomy style takes a lot of technical skill, so it'll definitely take a while to be able to replicate it properly if you don't already have that skill developed. I also love the way they draw hands, and some things I notice is that for starters, they tend to be very square and blocky rather than round and smooth. They make sure to include the dip at the fingertips and also include the fingernails, which is interesting since I feel like a lot of artists just ignore the fingernails. They also include the bump at the joints as well as define the knuckles. Lastly, they include some of the lines that appear on our hands that connect to our knuckles. Now when it comes to the chibis, the eyes are actually still small with one eye apart, but they're much closer to the edge of the face. The face itself is a lot more squished down, but still uses sharp lines rather than soft structure. The total height of their chibis is around 4 heads, with 1 head each for the top and the bottom part of the body, and then 1 head for the transition area of the pelvis. If you took the bottom half of the chibi and then tried to line it up with the top half, it would be almost the same length as the top of the chibi, just a little bit. It would probably go from about the feet, if you connect the feet to the pelvis, then probably go to about the forehead. Unlike most chibi styles where everything is very simplified down, they actually still use their more angular and realistic anatomy style here too, but the total width of the body seems to be about the same as the width of the head, with the main difference actually being the hands, which only include 3 fingers instead of 4 fingers. Okay, when it comes to their line art, they definitely use a thinner line art rather than thicker and use a brush with texture that mimics a pencil. They actually have a whole folder of multiple brushes available for free on their shop, and while I'm not sure which one exactly is used for the line art, I ended up using the mixed pressure one. But all you really need is a brush with a pencil texture with opacity on a bit of a lower end, so you won't have the lines be super dark and also have tapered lines. Like I said, in the anatomy section, the line art is overall very sharp with angular shapes rather than being soft with round shapes. Now this could just be because all of their characters that she draws is like that since they're all male characters, but that's all you really have to go off of for their mono art style. Now I'm not sure if she would keep this up with maybe more female characters or maybe just characters that she wants to look a little bit softer since she really only has her 4 OCs that she mainly draws, but either way she does seem to lean more to preferring much more angular shapes. The line art is relatively clean, using 1 big stroke over a bunch of smaller strokes, and while the color of the line art originally is just black, when they render pieces the colors of the line art do change. When it comes to rendering, I noticed they pick colors in a similar way to Blue Biscuits, where they choose 1 color for the base and then go down and to the right to get a shadow color, as well as adjusting the hue slightly to go towards the blue on the color wheel. But unlike TBHK or Blue Biscuits, they do blend the shadows out occasionally. Not all the time, but when they want a softer shadow, they do seem to either blend it out or use a more painterly brush to blend it out. While most of the art remains simple in shading, the face gets more attention, and honestly, this was quite hard. While the face has a standard shading like everything else, it looks like sometimes she'll add more details onto it with even small color shifts, which can make it pretty difficult to decipher. I did notice that they mix in the environment lighting into the skin tone as well, so for instance, if the character is outside in the daytime, then they'll blend in some blue paint marks into the skin, but they don't necessarily do this for like areas of the clothing. It seems to primarily be done on the face, probably to bring more attention to the face. For the coloring, I primarily use just a normal hard round brush with the blender, but in some cases there seems to be a bit of texture added, I think, although I'm not sure if this is added in post or if this is done already with a brush that has texture. When it comes to the line art, the layer will be set to alpha, and then they change the color of different sections to be a darker color than the color that the line art is touching. They leave some spots black, and from what I can tell, it's really just kind of based on vibes and what you think looks nice rather than some sort of set formula. Doing this gives the art a much more softer look to it, which I think is an interesting contrast to the more angular art style. They do seem to always change the line art color around the face to match the skin though. While they don't outline the character, they do seem to outline the face as well as the ears. And lastly, some bits of the line art sometimes get painted over, but again, this seems to just kind of come down to preference as to when it's done. Alright, now it was time to do the master copy, and of course, as always, the first time I do the master copy, I copy over the line art, so that way I can notice any small details I might have missed, as well as being able to focus primarily on the rendering, then also the proportions and line art. So when I drew this is their character Key, I think is how you say their name. I did notice a couple things while I did this masterwork. For instance, the neck is just very thick. It does follow more like realistic necks, I guess, but I'm just used to drawing really thin necks like you see in anime a lot. So it's definitely a bit weird. Rendering was also pretty difficult. This is when I kind of figured out that they use the same color system. However, I did find that the face was very difficult. I had a really hard time trying to get the face down, and I still don't think I really got it down. I did realize while studying the face that they did include some ambient lighting in the shadows, which again, from what I could tell, they don't include this elsewhere in the piece, just in the shadows, or just in the shadows of the face. I think they might do more blending than what I could necessarily tell with more like minimal color differences. But yeah, the rendering definitely feels like it's missing something. I'm just not really quite sure what that was, but overall I still like the way it came out. Okay, and then the second master copy I did was of Jun, I think is how you say his name. This one I didn't do a trace over, I just tried to copy the proportions to the best of my ability. It was definitely pretty difficult because again, I don't normally draw in these proportions, so getting these proportions down was really hard. I did focus more on the hair and kind of like the shapes that they kind of use for the hair, since they use very simplified shapes and kind of like break everything down in a way that I'm not really used to. So I was trying to prepare ahead of time when it came to having to copy this art style one for one, entirely just completely on my own with my own character and everything. But this is when I also noticed that sometimes they do use simpler shading. They don't always do really fancy shading on the face and stuff. So that was nice here because it was easier to replicate. But yeah, overall, I think it came out fine. Okay, and now it was time to make my own copy of her art style without referencing, you know, doing a one-for-one copy. This was definitely really hard because, again, the proportions are not proportions I normally use. So figuring out these proportions was definitely very difficult. I also realized here that their hands are pretty big. I always notice that the hands are big, and technically they're roughly the same size of like the face, like the typical guideline, but I do think that the hands are just a tad bit slightly bigger. But okay, so again, the proportions down was definitely difficult, and that definitely is not why I decided to increase the size of the image, so that way I had less to draw. No, not at all. I definitely had to keep in mind the width of just everything. The neck is super thick, the shoulders are super wide, everything is just much wider and bigger than what I normally draw, so it's definitely very difficult, and transferring my character into their art style was definitely pretty hard because I don't really have like a ton of different varieties to go off of. Like, how would they draw his hair? I'm not totally sure, and I'm not 100% sure if I did it super well, but I did just try to keep in mind that they usually try to make everything very blocky, very sharp, very angular, and really use shapes over rough lines and stuff instead of like soft lines and stuff like that. So I did try to keep that in mind, which I think helped. I think, you know, I feel like it kind of looks like something they would draw. It just definitely feels like it's missing something at the end. I think it might be something to do with the rendering, because I think I was actually pretty happy with just the liner and the sketch. But I definitely feel like I was missing something in the rendering. Again, they don't seem to really get too fancy with their rendering usually. So I did stick to a bit of the simpler end. But yeah, overall, I think it came out fine. It definitely was just very difficult. I also didn't really know what to do for the eyes, because for the eyes they're a little bit fancy, but they seem to keep their eyes very simple. So I decided not to include the pupils, since I don't think they seem to include pupils. So I decided to just go with the regular red eyes and ignore the little diamond pupil he usually has. Okay, and last but not least is to implement this art style into my art style. So this was pretty interesting since I prefer the proportions that I use. So like I said, the main thing I wanted to focus on was more the anatomy and the hands over everything else. Now, of course, the anatomy takes a lot of technical skill, and while I'm working on my anatomy skills, I don't think the technical skill is quite there yet. But I definitely did really want to focus on the hands because I just really like the way they draw their hands. So I really want to try to implement that into my art style. So I decided to use the same exact pose. Where before I would use a different pose in the TVHK video. This time I thought, you know, let's use the same pose since our art style is so different. I thought it'd be very interesting to see the two differences side by side. So in terms of what I decided to copy over, I really just decided to primarily focus on copying over the style of the hands. I did think about trying to do them shirtless or something just to study the anatomy a bit more, but since that is a much more technical skill, I think I will just continue to work on my technical skill, but I will keep in mind that they seem to use much more angular shapes overall. So I think when I do decide to draw like the anatomy of someone, maybe without the shirt on or something, I will try to keep in mind to use much more angular shapes. But yeah, I did also use their coloring method as well as some of my own coloring method. I am messing with my rendering style a lot, so it'll probably look a little bit different through every single art style video, of course. But you know, this is like my general baseline of a style. This is the general baseline of my art style. But I will point out one thing that I don't think I mentioned earlier, but I did notice that it seems like sometimes when they apply shadow to the hair, they use a darker shadow line to differentiate between the shadow and like the normal hair color. They'll use like a darker line, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I did that here. I like the way it came out. So I think I might, you know, look into implementing that into my future pieces as well. Now, when it came to the chibi, I think this is the first time I've drawn a chibi that I was actually kind of happy with how it turned out. And again, I kept in mind the proportions that they use, as well as keeping things a bit more on the angular side rather than using softer lines like other chibi styles do. I also kept the more realistic-ish way they render hands, or they do the line art for hands, which I thought was rather interesting. Also, this is a sneak peek to the character's new redesign, by the way. Redesign video will be out in a couple weeks, either in October or November. I'm not sure exactly when, but you know, here's an early sneak peek to his full design because I don't think anyone here has seen his full design yet. So this is like basically a sneak peek. It is more or less finalized. But yeah, I really like the way the chibi came out. Again, I kept in proportions and the size of the head and everything in mind. And I'm actually just like super happy with the way it came out. I think I need to work on the rendering. I'm not super happy with the rendering, but I also didn't try that hard on the rendering. This was pretty basic. But yeah. Okay, and that's it. Let me know what you guys think of the overall style and how my attempt went. Also, if you learned anything, I hope it was useful. I have done 2 videos in this series, one for TBHK and one for Blue Biscuits already that you can watch. The next one has been voted on by everyone, and it will be Kuro Shiro, at least at the time of recording this. That is who seems to have won the poll. I will be posting another poll that will be live at the time this video goes live, so make sure to go and vote for who you want to see after Kuro Shiro. I post these every single week on Friday. So next week will be Kuro Shiro, and then the next runner-ups will be Tameka, My Hero Academia style, Link Click style, as well as Tokyo Ghoul. Yes, so the styles are the next contenders, so go vote for who you want to see next. And I mainly post videos about things like character design, drawing in my sketchbook, and of course these art studies every Friday. So if that sounds interesting, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like the video if you found it useful, make sure to leave a comment of who or what artists you would like to see yourself next, and I'll make sure to add them to my list. And yeah, okay, bye bye.